Meeting is reopened, and the floor is for the Minister.
Ministry of Education, you may have the floor. Please answer the question in relation to family education. Next, the Ministry of Justice. Please discuss the issues in relation to same-sex marriage. And then the Social and Family Affairs Administration will be the third one. Okay, I'll speak on behalf of the Ministry of Education. Chair, members of the committee, dear colleagues, good afternoon. In 2003, our administration set up the Family Education Act, and in the past couple of years, our annual budget is 195 million Taiwan dollars. Family education aims to strengthen the function of families, including gender education, marital education, and the management of family resources and other relevant issues. Thank you. The Ministry of Justice, please explain our stance on same-sex marriage. Well, the Social and Family Affairs Administration or the Protective Services Administration, please answer the question in relation to the alternative care system and the deinstitutionalization, the quality of care at institutions. And also for those who are leaving the institution, how do we help them make necessary preparations and the age at which they are required to leave the institution? Last but not least, do we have a comprehensive alternative care development plan? Thank you for the questions. We will talk about high-risk families and how they can access financial support. First of all, we do have Social Assistance Act in place. If such high-risk families are eligible according to the law, we will help them to apply for low-income support or mid to low-income household subsidies. Well, if they are not eligible for such subsidies, if they are disadvantaged, underprivileged in the rural areas, we also have emergency living allowances for the children in these families for a certain period of time. If they are not eligible for either of these, social workers will also try to tap into resources in the private sector to render assistance financially, non-financially to these families. If children have difficulty receiving education, or if these children need to be looked after by people outside their family, we also have assistance and subsidies for them to access such services. But we have to emphasize that for high-risk families, we have to start with improving the economic conditions of parents in these families. For example, we can help them to get vocational training so that they can have stable stream of income to support their family. And they can then look after their children properly. So next, alternative care. In terms of the overall planning, yes, we have been planning for deinstitutionalization all along. In the implementation rules of the Children and Youth Welfare Act, we are also considering maybe we have to have this subsidiary principle. We start with the kinship care before we consider foster families, and next, institutional care. Family community-based or family-oriented care will also be considered along with resources available at the communities so that we can make sure the children can be looked after not only in his family but also at the community level. Of course, there's much more to be done at the community level. So now we do have this group family program which will probably be incorporated into the rights of the Children and Youth Welfare Act. So we do want to keep children at their local communities. As for the number of children in institutions, that is falling, while the number of institutions run by the private sector is increasing. In fact, the number of institutions in the private sector may be increasing, but it is true that when they try to recruit qualified staff, especially the children sent to institutions are usually young people with special needs. That is why these institutions must have qualified staff. That's why there seems to be some overcapacity at these institutions. The local government will also have to consider the need for emergency placement. Therefore, the local government will assess whether or not there's sufficient capacity within their jurisdiction. So right now, we do want to develop more community-based care systems. That is why we are also looking into the potential of group family programs, as well as foster families. As for the number of children in institution falling, whether or not there are sufficient subsidies for foster families. The reason why foster families have been falling, there are several reasons. First, in the past, it's usually because the biological family could not afford to keep their children economically. That's why they had to go to the foster families. But now, usually it's because the children have special needs. That is why the number of children requiring foster care is falling. We also need to empower and strengthen foster families. The number of children in foster care has been falling. As a result, the expenses incurred at foster families, we actually are providing more subsidies to cover them. In addition, we are also provide more tailor-made training for foster families, especially those that have to care for children with special needs. They can have different training, and we will provide them more resources and subsidies as well. It is our hope that through a wide range of means, we can help these foster families. As for children leaving the institution, is it true that some 15-year-olds have to leave the institution? No. Actually, we do let children stay in the institution until they are fully independent. There are some college students who are still staying at the institution, and they don't leave until they graduate from college. By the time they leave the institution, we require the institution to make sure the children are prepared and ready. And according to Children and Youth Welfare Act and the Act Preventing the Exploitation of Children and Youth, there are provisions requiring for empowerment training, and there will also be financial support, welfare measures to help them to study or work. If they cannot return to their biological homes, we also have independence empowerment programs for youth. We can provide them subsidies for their tuition fees, apartment rentals, etc. Professional social workers will have to visit and investigate before these subsidies can be rendered. But ultimately, we do want these children to return to their home, family, and community. The quality of institutions may vary widely. What oversight mechanism do we have? According to law, every 3 years, we have to evaluate the performance of these institutions. In addition to such evaluations, we also provide regular audits and guidance and assistance. In fact, in 2016, we start to have a checklist which help us to audit on the situations in these institutions, and we will assess how they perform. We also provide continuous training for staff members of these institutions. More resources are gathered to provide such continuous training. And then starting 2018, in addition to the quarterly reports rendered by local government to the central government will also perform random checks on these institutions. As for the budgets for institutions run by the private sector, starting 2018, we're going to ask local governments to increase the budget allocated for such institutions. It's going to increase from 15,000 Taiwan dollars to 21,000 Taiwan dollars per child. In other words, the increase about 30%. We are going to continue to monitor their operating expenses and see whether we can have more tiered subsidy system for these institutions. And then starting 2018, we will increase the budget for these institutions. We will also allow them to recruit more staff, and more professional subsidies will be made available to them so that the institutions can have lower financial burden while providing better services. As for adoptions, cross-border adoptions, inter-country adoptions, in 2011, in the Children and Youth Welfare Act, we already make it clear that domestic adoption should take precedence according to the Hague Convention. That's the principle we have adopted. However, over these years, we have found that Taiwanese people are still very traditional. They tend to prefer adopting children who are healthy and under the age of 3. Therefore, for older kids or children with special needs or disabilities, domestic adopters are less likely to adopt them. But we are continually providing outreach programs because the courts will make the final call. Therefore, we do remind the judges, make sure he considers whether it is necessary to go for adoptions, and the assessment or the evaluation of the adoptive families. For example, there can be some trial adoption periods practice. But in the end, there will still be some children who, without inter-country adoptions, my stay in the institutions, is this in the best interest of the child? We have to conduct more comprehensive assessment. So family-based care is still in the best interest of the child, we believe. Moreover, why are there so many Vietnamese children being adopted by Taiwanese? This is because there are many international marriages. We do have a lot of Taiwanese men marrying Vietnamese women, and some of these Vietnamese spouses have children left in Vietnam. So after they get married in Taiwan to Taiwanese men, they would like to adopt their children left in Vietnam. So Taiwanese people adopting children from abroad, it's usually from mainland China or Vietnam. Well, I will leave it there for now. I think I will answer 5 questions. First, kinship care is very important in our care system. Starting 2012, we have developed a particular model for kinship care, including the performance assessment indicators and the range of care. The purpose is to provide guidance for local governments. Secondly, the kinship care is also incorporated in the training of social workers, because social workers are still at the front line initiating any possible kinship care arrangements. Thirdly, we even set aside a budget to help local governments to promote kinship care. Hopefully, we will be able to reduce the number of children in institutions. Moreover, we do have regular assessment of these kinship care programs. We hope that the positive experiences at local government level can be shared with other local governments so that they can learn from each other. Through such efforts, we have seen in numbers that 3% of children used to be placed in kinship care. Now it has risen to 9%. Our goal is to increase it to 15%. We know it's not that easy to arrange kinship care, especially in the Chinese community. Kinship care is very different from foster care as well as institutional care, because very often these relatives are not prepared. They do not have a chance to prepare themselves for the children joining their family all of a sudden. Therefore, social workers have to make sure the children in question are safe in a very period of time. They also have to find a home for the children. And in the Chinese community, the concept of blood kinship is very much emphasized. Therefore, not that many relatives are willing to jump in and care for the children.
I think some committee members ask about whether the regulations for assessments are too strict or too lenient. In fact, there are three elements in our standards. First of all, the relationship between the children and the caretaker. Is there a good relationship? And the second element is the willingness of the children. Third, if this child has multiple siblings, can they all be adopted by the same kinship family? That's a factor we consider. Then the willingness of the kinship family and the characteristics of the family members in that family? For example, was there any criminal records? And is the family able to truly provide care? And the relationship between this kinship family and the original family, is it good or not? So all of these are taken into consideration before we decide whether the child should be sent for kinship care. But we do believe that kinship care is very important for alternative care. So we have some policies that are ongoing. For example, we want to include it in the Children and Youth Welfare and Protection Act. And our goal is to raise the percentage of kinship care to 50% out of all placements. And we hope that we'll be able to provide more resources, more funding to the foster families, just like the supports that to give the kinship family, just like the financial support we give to foster family. And before kinship care, there could be a transitional period. And in this transition, children can still be taken care of, and they're prepared before they go into the kinship care. And during this time, social workers can look for the best kinship families for this particular child. I think these several key points are all the things that we have to cover if we want to promote kinship care rights. And one question was about corporate punishments within family. Well, in Taiwan, corporate punishments may be used for punishment or disciplinary action. And in civil code, it is stated that parents can punish the children within their power. But in Article 49 in the Children and Youth Welfare Act, it is stated that nobody can abuse the child physically or psychologically. There shall not be any mistreatment toward children. And corporate punishment hinders children's psychological and physical health, and that's why it is forbidden. And if anyone violates Children and Youth Welfare Act and abuse child either physically or psychologically, then the law stipulates that this person or the parent has to go through 40 to 50 hours of training, or the court may give out a protective order and order the parents to receive further education and training. But what's over disciplinary actions or what's physical and psychological harm? Well, I think we have to check whether the measures taken by the parents are reasonable and the impact of such measures on the children. And we will also listen to the children for their opinions to decide whether such measures are reasonable or unreasonable disciplinary actions. And is it possible to remove the perpetrator from the family? Well, child abuse is one form of domestic violence, and in Domestic Violence Prevention Act, there are different remedies. For example, we may ask the court to give a protection order to order the perpetrator to leave the family. And in order to listen to the children, to help them exercise their rights to express their opinions, we will listen to the children's opinions, and we will also look at the best interest of child. If we think that it is most beneficial for the perpetrator to leave the house for the sake of the child, then we will ask the court to issue the order. 80% of the abusers in the family are the primary caregiver. So if we give a protection order to ask the perpetrators to leave home, it's not necessarily the best solution, especially in the Chinese community, because in the Chinese community, there's a very strong sense of ethics. If you're ordering an elderly person or an elder person in the family to leave the family, it's not necessarily the best solution, or this may not meet the Chinese culture. As for the children returning their original home, and before that, what attention would you give to the original family? Well, first of all, before children return to their home, we ask the parents to come to our institution to be trained first, to prepare themselves for welcoming the child back. We also provide counseling to children if they have trauma because of past domestic violence. And after children return, according to Children and Youth Welfare Act, we have to follow up for 1 year, and we pay close attention to the function of this original family. In addition, when children are still in institution, we will come up with a family treatment plan as soon as possible. For example, we issue guidelines for parents. We help parents to find jobs, or we ask these parents to receive therapy. So we address both the children and the parents so that they can finally be united and become a family again. That who decides the child is to be placed out of the family? Well, in Taiwan, every year, around 30,000 children are abused and reported. The social workers will receive such a report. Afterwards, would initiate a triage of the children and determine whether such harm it may pose immediate danger to the children. Then we will examine the function of the original family. Is it safe in the family? If it's not safe, then the emergency placement plan is initiated. So around 3% of the children are placed in these institutions. And if within 72 hours it's not safe for the children to return home, then we will ask the court to issue an order to allow for extended placement. So within the 72 hours, the social workers will find out other solutions for the child. And if returning to the home is not possible in the foreseeable future, then we'd issue the application to the courts in order to extend the placement. All right, MOJ, any response? I would like to talk about the civil code first. As for best interest of child, well, this principle is stipulated in civil code for multiple times. For example, custody after divorce, such as what is stipulated in Article 1055-1. And in the same document, you see some regulations regarding adoption. As long as this adoptee is a child, then when the court decide for adoption or for the determination of adoption, then Civil Code 1083-1 is applied, just like 1055. So when adoption decisions are made, both articles have to be considered. And as for the age of marriage, since they are married, it is assumed that they have more capacity. So in our civil code, if minors get married, they are considered to have legal capacity. I think this also meets the best interest of child principle. And the Constitutional Court had given an interpretation of the civil code. Currently, in the civil code, it is not allowed for same-sex marriage is not allowed under civil code, and this is found to be unconstitutional by the Grand Justice. And the scope of this interpretation refers to the two people, the couple in the same-sex relationship, and whether they're able to have a legal relationship. So the scope of that interpretation only refers to the relationship between the couple. Therefore, as for children in the same-sex family, it's not in the scope of this Judicial Yuan interpretation made in May this year. And last year, in 2016, the legislative yuan was reviewing a bill to legalize same-sex marriage or the amendment to civil code. And the legislators, in fact, considered the relationship of children and same-sex parents in the family. But that proposal has not yet been passed. And currently, after that Judicial Yuan interpretation, given the scope of this interpretation, what the executive branch of the government have to deal with is a relationship between the couple, but not the family relationship between the children and the same-sex parents. But there have been many discussions at the legislative yuan about the family relationship between the children and same-sex parents and what rights they have. So we talk about best of interest of child for many times. And when we revise laws or when we legislate new laws, I believe that this principle will be considered so that we can meet the requirements under best interest of child principle. And this legislation has not yet been passed. I mean, legalizing same-sex marriage has not yet been done. And the Constitutional Court gave the legislative yuan 2 years to amend the law or to legislate new law. And before that law becomes reality, then I think we still need to follow civil code. That is, the one parent who has a guardianship of the parents can exercise the power as a guardianship. In the future, when the civil code is revised and if other legislation also need to be amended, we will always keep best interest of child at the heart of such a revision. Thank you. Is there any additional information? No, then, Mr. Chair, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Minister, and thank you for all the responses. I think there is one follow-up question, because we have to watch the clock.
Indeed, I'm very conscious of the time, and I want to thank the representatives of the ministries for their very concrete and informative answers. I just want to be clear on kinship care. And and my question is, since it was said that kinship care, in particular, I think in the Chinese community, is difficult is not a natural reaction of the community to children who may need to live outside the parental home. Does this apply also to informal kinship care? In other words, there we're talking about formal kinship care, where the state is involved in determining whether or not a child should live with in the wider family, whereas in, let's say, most societies, the informal form of kinship care, where it's simply an arrangement between the parents and the wider family without state involvement. In most societies, and I'm simply asking for clarification in relation to Taiwan, this is by far the most prevalent form of alternative care. So informal arrangements. So I just want to make sure that, first of all, I'm right in thinking that informal kinship care is not a particularly familiar concept in Taiwan. And I'd also like to ensure that I'm right in thinking that in indigenous communities, it's a different situation. That in indigenous communities, the kinship will take care of the children informally. Thank you.
I would like to know, under law and regulation, how frequent is the review of the situation of the child to learn whether it's necessary that he keeps on staying in the institution? And secondly, is corporal punishment in education by teachers and parents punishable under the criminal law?
Those were the additional questions, Minister.
Informal kinship care. Okay, we will ask the Department of Protective Services to respond to this question. Well, thank you very much for the question on informal kinship care. There are many examples of informal kinship care in Taiwan, but what I was reporting was formal kinship care that involved government decisions. And there was an example when in the family, both parents were on drugs, but the aunt of this child is able to provide care very well, so it requires no government intervention. So after both parents are imprisoned, this child is taken care of directly by the aunt without the government intervention. And this is very common, especially in indigenous communities. So we do not include the data in our reports of formal kinship care. Now, how frequently do we review the situation of a child in institution? Well, actually, we do the assessment every 3 months. We look at the physical situation and the psychological situation of the child in the institution every 3 months. How about visitations from government to children? If children stayed in a 24-hour institution, there's a formal evaluation of the institution every 3 years, and we ask the local government to do the monitoring, and central government also do a spot check. And every year we do at least the local government have to do 1 or 2 evaluations of such of these institutions. So this is a policy that will be initiated since 2018. We will not tell the institutions we're going there if we're going to do a spot check. So 1 or twice at least every year. Anything else? Okay, from MOE. So if teachers give corporal punishments to the children, well, according to Education Fundamental Act, teachers will be disciplined. And if teachers also threatened or insult the children, then the teachers have to be subject to the punishments under criminal code. And if the teachers violate some administrative regulations when giving corporate punishments, they will also be subject to administrative punishments. When teaching the students, if teachers do something to cause damages to the children, which is regulated under the civil code, they will be then subject to civil code. So teachers may be subject to punishments under criminal code, civil code, and Education Fundamental Act.
Thank you very much for all the answers to all the questions. And we will move to the next cluster, which is cluster number 6. The formal heading of that cluster is disabilities, health, basic health and welfare. So the floor is for Mr. Tobin.
Thank you very much. I'm conscious of the hour, so I'll try and be concise with my questions. The first question relates to the issue of consent to medical treatment. My understanding is at the moment a young person requires consent from his or her parents before they can get medical treatment. My question for you is there consideration given to the possibility that a young person could obtain medical treatment without their parents' consent, where they are mature and understand the nature of the procedure? That position is consistent with the position advanced by the Committee on the Rights of the Child, and I would like to know whether consideration has been given to adopting that stance in Taiwan as well. So, for example, under the Committee's interpretation, a young girl of 17 who wants an abortion and understands the nature of the procedure could obtain that procedure without her father's or mother's consent. Would the same situation apply in Taiwan? That's the end of the first question. The second question goes to the question of teenage pregnancies and the support provided to young girls who fall pregnant. We were given figures yesterday that suggest that in Taiwan, in 2015, there were 200,000 births and 400,000 pregnancies. That is a complicated issue. I don't want to get stuck in that today. What I do want to know is what assistance is given to a young girl who falls pregnant and wants to have that child. That's the end of question 2. Question 3 relates to the broad issue of sexual education. And can I say that I am impressed that your government in 2011 adopted a progressive approach to this issue. I come from a country where my government is very scared of this issue, so I'm very impressed that you are addressing it. That's my first observation. But there are many issues that have been raised with respect to this practice in this country. The first concern I would like you to address is whether the current sex education adequately addresses the needs of young people who identify as being gay, lesbian, bisexual, transgender or intersex. The second question goes to the qualifications of the teachers who provide sex education. We heard yesterday from some of the students that often teachers were awkward or shy or weren't prepared to provide that education. I'd like to clarify what teaching training is provided to those educators. The next issue goes to the incidence of STDs, sexually transmitted diseases, amongst young people. We've received information that there's been an increase in STDs in the past 5 years. I'm interested to know whether any research has been done to identify the cause of that increase and it's been linked to the nature of the education provided. The last question on sexual education goes to the involvement of children in the process of developing and designing sex education policies in school. We received information from students yesterday that they were very keen to be involved, but they didn't feel they had the opportunity to do so. So my question is, are there opportunities for young people to assist in the design of sex education policies in school? One last question. on sex education. It's a big topic, as I said. Goes to the need to raise awareness amongst parents, particularly with respect to the issue of sexual orientation. Students yesterday identified their concerns that when it came to issues about diversity in sexual orientation, sometimes parents weren't fully informed of the ways in which young people might express their sexual desires or orientation. So my question is, what measures, if any, are being undertaken to ensure that parents fully understand the sexual experiences and development of young people in the 21st century? One last question. In some ways, after 6 years, I wonder whether it is now time for the government to have a review of the sex education policy to see how effective it has been and whether in fact any decision has been made to have that review to assess whether we need to improve it, maintain it or make adjustments. They're my questions on sex education. Moving to the next issue, and that is the question of nutrition and obesity. We've received information to suggest that there are areas in which young people are deficient in various vitamins and minerals. I would like to know whether there's any data to confirm the accuracy of those claims. And secondly, on the issue of obesity, there has been suggestions that insufficient measures are being taken to regulate advertising, fast food, soft drinks, and their link to obesity. I'm curious to know whether there is an issue in Taiwan around obesity, as there is in my country. We're one of the worst in the world with teenage obesity, I think second only to America. I'm keen to know, is that an issue? And if so, what measures are being taken by the state to address obesity amongst young Taiwanese? Final question goes to the issue of mental health services. This again is a big issue in my own country, where in recent years we've identified a failure to address the needs of children when it comes to mental health. We've received information that there are gaps in services with respect to young people suffering from stress, from substance abuse, and also from issues arising in relation to their sexual identity. Can you please advise us what measures are being done to improve access to mental health services in Taiwan? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tully. Other members question at this time?
Just one on health to add to John. Yesterday, many of the children spoke about their concerns about air quality on their health, and just a question to see what is the government doing to monitor pollution and its particular impact on children and their development and their health.
Julie.
What is being done to make pregnant children or girls to know which are the institutions who can help them in their situation? We understand yesterday that this information is not promulgated, so what is being done in this sense?
Those are the questions, Minister, and you are invited to organize the answers.
Sex education. National Health Promotion Administration, please. On sex education, we work closely with the Ministry of Education. I think later the Ministry of Education representative can talk about what they have been doing. We do have a health promotion school where life skills are taught, including how to build a relationship, how to have a safe sex. We do provide certification to these so-called sex health schools. But sometimes teenagers do not want to speak up, so we do have a website where a wide range of information is available for teenagers and elementary school students for them to access sexual health education. The content on that website has been vetted by experts, psychiatrists, experts on sexual health. In addition, we also have teenagers clinics. More privacy is provided at such clinics. There are 193 such clinics throughout Taiwan. So teenagers can ask questions about sex to physicians, nurses, and social workers at these clinics. The Ministry of Education in terms of Gender Equity Education Act, that act aims to promote gender equality, especially substantive equality, eliminating gender-based discrimination. In terms of the curriculum, again, based on the Gender Equity Education Act, sexual education, education about different sexual orientation, how to build relationship with others are all included in the grade 1 to 9 curriculum. Gender equity education consists of 69 indicators, including knowing LGBT groups and sexual health education. In middle school, from the 7th to 9th grade, the health studies will include sexual health education. In senior high schools, in the subject health and nursing education, information is provided and taught to the students. Also in high schools, in the subject of, in middle school, the civil and social studies courses also incorporate sexual health education. And in order to promote greater understanding of sexual health education, we also have campus-based HIV or AIDS prevention programs, along with sexual health education. We work with non-governmental organizations to organize activities on campus to help students gain accurate knowledge about sex. Thank you. I think the member of the committee especially asks whether or not children have the opportunity to take part in the curriculum making or policy making process at schools where sexual health education is concerned, and whether or not measures are taken to help parents to know different sexual orientations. The Ministry of Education, based on the Gender Equity Education Act, asks each local government to set up a gender equity committee which consists of experts on gender equality, teachers' representatives, as well as parents' representatives. Such a gender equity committee aims to promote gender equity education in schools. In addition, the committee helps to develop training workshops for parents. Different cities, for example, in Kaohsiung City, they also organize training courses for parents. They also have designed pamphlets or flyers with information on different sexual orientation for parents' reference. And when the school has a sports day activity, they would disseminate such information to parents. As for the development of sexual health education policies and the curriculum, whether or not children have a chance to take part, well, the opportunities are relatively limited. The student representatives can take part in the curriculum development committee meetings, but I think in the future we can encourage more student participation in the curriculum development for sexual health education. Next, on abortion and teenage pregnancy. I think we can ask the National Health Promotion Administration to answer the question.
Let me start with abortion. Currently, in the Genetic Health Act, it stipulates that if, say, a 17-year-old girl wants to abort, she has to get permission of the parents. And if parents have different opinions from the girl, and since most of these discussions are conducted in the hospital then will initiate the social workers services and then have a family consultation session to make the final decision. And we are drafting a division of this act. We have 2 meetings to revise the act already this year. Hopefully, we want to involve a third party in the consultation session to work with the judicial system and also the welfare group in case the girl and the parents have different opinions as to whether or not to go through with the abortion procedure. As for medical consensus of children, doctors have to obtain informed consensus first before giving medical services. So for minors, their legal agents have to be the one to give the informed consensus to the doctors. But of course, if it is an emergency, then according to the Medical Act, hospitals and clinics can apply the emergency medical procedures first and must not delay such medical procedures, even though there is no permission from the family members. And the same act also stipulates that hospitals have to explain the purpose of the surgery, the complication prospects, and the prospect of the surgeries. And only after getting those consensus can the hospitals operate on the patients. But if it is an emergency, then those above can be exempted. And if the patient is a minor and if the patient is does not have the awareness to sign the consensus, then the guardians can serve as the legal agent. And we also encourage family meetings to include medical service providers, family members, legal guardians, and the children themselves. And if children in such a family meeting want to express opinions, then the doctors would address the concerns that this child may have. How about the pregnant teenage girl? Is there any assistance provided to help this girl after she delivers? The issue of teenage pregnancy, we always have our promotional program regarding relationships and regarding sexual health education. There is a national hotline and national website. We require local government to set up a single contact for this issue. So there's a procedure to serve pregnant teenagers. So social workers will be assigned to help these pregnant teenagers. These teenagers may need economic support or mental support or help in seeking jobs. Or it is possible that the original family of this girl does not support this pregnant teenager. Then we may help place the girl and the child. If this teenage girl wants to give the baby for adoption, we will provide matching services for her as well. And if the parents are minors, then it's definitely one of the cases social workers have to address. Social workers will provide services, special services for minor parents. So we want to do it right at the upper stream. But if there are cases of teenage pregnancy at later stages, we will provide services accordingly, including financial support. Thank you. According to Gender Equity Education Act, Ministry of Education helps schools to provide assistance to pregnant teenagers and help to protect their rights to education. MOE has a guideline to support such students. If schools are made aware that their students are pregnant, then a task force has to be established. The principal should be the convener, and the counselor's office is the contact window to coordinate resources and take necessary measures in order to help the student to finish her studies. So the protection of the right to education is very critical. Additionally, in order to prevent these kind of events from happening, schools should teach children to have the right attitude towards sex and should know how to have protected sex so that they can prevent themselves from unexpected pregnancy. The schools may organize activities or workshops and teach students about this knowledge. As for the students who have to take leaves from schools because of their pregnancy, the regular attendance rule does not apply to them because usually if students miss 30% of the classes, they will be failed. But this rule does not apply to pregnant students. As for the services and sexual health education, counseling, well, these are also given to any girls or teenagers who need such help. Increasing STD, any agency who can respond to that question? I'm from CDC. In Taiwan, syphilis or AIDS have to be reported according to our law. For students between 15 to 19, the gonorrhea and syphilis are indeed increasing. But we compare the data, compare the year-on-year data, the increased cases are not as much. We have about 112 cases of syphilis and gonorrhea. Well, last year there were 112. This year there are 122. For gonorrhea, there were 241 last year and 254 this year. And AIDS, there were 88, and this year there are 98. In previous years, it seems that there was an increased trend of STD, and it seems that the increasing trend is more obvious among males, but we do not have the disaggregated data on sexual orientation. Therefore, we cannot tell whether most of those who were inflicted with STDs were gays or MSM. But in 2015, an act was amended to encourage people to go for HIV screening. So children who are under 19 can take such a screening without parental permission. We assume that because of the increased screening for HIV, the screening for syphilis and gonorrhea also done more than before. And the increasing STD trends may be associated with online dating. So in recent years, we promote protected sex, targeting the children who like to use online dating applications. Next question on malnutrition or obesity. Maybe the National Health Promotion Administration can respond to this. Okay, thank you very much for this question. Speaking of malnutrition, of course, it's a serious issue. In Taiwan, undernutrition is not an issue, but uneven nutrition is an issue. So there are guidelines of a daily dosage of nutrients in Taiwan, and we provide education targeting children who are at different stages. For example, the nutrition guideline for infants, for young children, and for children in middle school, and so on, to make sure that they can take the nutrients they need. And of course, monitoring is important. So for a very long time, we monitor the nutrition status of students in schools. Children spend a lot of time in schools, so we work with Ministry of Education. And MOE has guidelines for school lunches and for the food and drinks that can be sold on campus. In preschool, there is also a guideline to make sure that the infants or preschoolers can get the nutrients as acquired. Lunch provided, and there's a guideline as well to regulate the lunch provided in junior high school, and there's guideline to regulate shops or stores which sell food or beverages around school. As for in transit fat and drinks with much sugar content, they're also underregulated. So we're working with an FDA to give regulations. And just like in Australia, obesity among children is an issue. I think Taiwan ranks number 3 in terms of children obesity. So there are programs to prevent obesity, and there are also guidelines to prevent children obesity. So as I said earlier, we have quite a few regulations to regulate the nutrients provided in school, and we want to encourage students to exercise more. So preventive information is provided to the students, the teachers, and the caregivers. We have made some progress because from 2013 to 2016, according to a national poll, the obesity rates decreased by 1.5%, 1.9%, and 4.4% for elementary school students, junior high school students, and high school students. And we want to continue to make more progress so that Taiwan will no longer be the number 3 in terms of children's obesity. More information on obesity and malnutrition. Students may eat lunch in school, and the lunch is provided on campus. So MOE has a guideline to regulate the content of the food or the nutrient. There's also a guideline to regulate the food and the beverages which can be sold on campus. For example, the canteen in the schools can also sell milk or 100% juice and so on, and water. As for preschoolers and their meals, if they go to preschools, these schools have to follow guidelines and model recipes in order to provide balanced nutrient to the preschoolers. Well, sometimes teenagers may go outside the campus to buy snacks and beverages, and that's why MOE has a guideline to regulate those shops in the neighborhood of the campus. For example, those stores which sell breakfast have to follow the regulation. Schools have to talk these breakfast stores so that they can work together and to protect the health of students. Regarding obesity, MOE has a program to facilitate health of students. So elementary school students or high school students are protected under this health facilitation guideline. There is a regular examination of children's weight. Such weights are recorded in a computerized system. So the system can be used to monitor the weights of all the students from elementary school to high school. So local governments can easily pull out this data and analyze which schools' students are overweight on an average. And these schools have to take some actions to address these issues. For example, they have to encourage students to exercise more, or they have to talk to nutrition specialists to change the content of the lunch provided in schools, or they should provide weight-losing summer camp for students or clubs. MOE subsidizes schools to conduct regular physical examination of children in order to make sure that students are healthy. Thank you.
In terms of mental health, yes, on mental health, we work closely with the Ministry of Education, but at my department of mental and oral health, we also have specific programs tailored for teenagers. And on that website, teenagers can access a lot of information useful for them. As for Professor Lum's question about air quality, the Environmental Protection Administration, would you like to answer the question? The Executive Yuan has specific strategies to prevent air pollution. We also have relevant laws and regulations in place. For all stationary sources of pollution, we do have specific emissions thresholds, and each year we would lower the threshold. Central and local governments also continuously monitor the indoor and outdoor air quality. Such information is widely available on the websites. The EPA recently has conducted research into PM 2.5 issues, and we're going to adjust our pollution thresholds year by year. If the air quality worsens, we also have emergency measures which will be implemented by local government along with the health department, welfare department, and the education department. And they may decide to reduce the amount of outdoor activities for school children, and more educational and outreach programs will be implemented by the central government too. Any other points you would like to make? Health Promotion Administration would like to provide additional information on abortions based on the National Health Insurance database and the database on the controlled abortion drug, RU486. We can have a rough estimation about the number of induced abortion per annum in Taiwan based on the consumption of RU486 and the number of induced abortions carried out at hospitals. Every year, Taiwan has about 50 to 60,000 abortions. And every year we have 200,000 newborn babies. So it's kind of a 1 to 3 proportion. Okay, back to you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Follow-up questions, Mr. Tobin?
Can I just say thank you very much. They were very, very detailed and informative answers, so I'm very grateful. Thank you.
Other members? No? Okay. One clarification from my part on the consensus issue. Medical treatment of children requires, as I understand, the permission of the person who is in charge, who has the custody, the power, most of the time the parents, sometimes a legal guardian. What role plays the view of the child? Is the consensus of the child, the consent of the child, necessary next to the parental consent? Can I get an answer to that question?
Well, let me put it this way. In terms of medical treatment, we're talking about a very professional and complex issue. Physicians will make the decision depending on the vital signs and the physical status and conditions of the child. So we do respect physicians' professional judgment. Informed consent, of course, is to make sure that the child patient and their parents are fully aware of the potential dangers of such medical procedures. But when it comes to treating diseases or complications, we need to respect the professional judgment made by the physicians. The child's consent or the parent's consent may come in the secondary place. The physician's professional judgment may take precedence.
Can I observe that is quite remarkable? If I go to a hospital, the doctor tells me that I need a certain treatment. I have to have quite a very convincing argument not to follow his advice on the treatment, which is, I think, not in accordance with international standards. If I am a child of 16 and the doctor informs me about what he wants to do, what the possible results, what the possible negative impact of the operation or treatment can be. And I said to the doctor, thank you very well, thank you very much, and I'm going home. I don't want to have that treatment. That's the end of the story, I suppose, also in Taiwan, isn't it? Okay, that's clear. That's clear. When it is a court, then the judge said, can you record that the person nodded yes? So you agree with me that the child has the right to say no, and the doctor cannot impose the treatment on the child. That's a correct assumption.
Even though I said the physician's professional judgment takes precedence, that means we want to make sure that in the case of emergency care, physician's call is most important. But in the case where no imminent harm or danger to the child, of course, the physician, the parents, the child's opinions matter.
Yes, Minister?
Medical professionals' judgment is one issue, but parental consent on behalf, making decisions on behalf of the child is another matter. But for older kids, for example, 16-year-old, 17-year-old, maybe the child patient can also say no to the decision made on their behalf by either the physician or the parents. So could you elaborate on that for our committee members' reference? If the child is 17-year-old and older, and he specifically expressed his views, then, of course, it's necessary for us to respect his views. However, in the case where emergency care is needed, then the physicians will make recommendations. Otherwise, of course, it's important to respect the child's views. In our physician training, or in the view of medical associations, especially when it comes to professional ethics, have you ever discussed how do you balance between the child patient's autonomy vis-a-vis the parent's decision, vis-a-vis the physician's professional judgment? Well, in the field, if a child patient is being treated by a doctor, after the doctor explains everything to the child, there's no way the physician can impose forcefully upon the child whatever treatment he recommends.
Thank you for the clarification and the answers. I assume that we can, after this particular topic on health, leave this room in a healthy manner and have good health tonight. And I hope to see you tomorrow at 9 o'clock again for the remaining clusters number 7 and number 8. Thank you very much for all your presence, all your interest. Very much appreciated. Have a wonderful evening. Meeting is closed.
谢谢5位国际审查委员，也谢谢各位同仁的辛苦。那明天我们继续努力。明天好像是教育部是重头戏，谢谢大家，谢谢。
各位贵宾，感谢您参与我们今日的会议，同时也请您携带您的随身物品，以及记得归还口译设备，谢谢。Thank you all for a great meeting of today. Please carry your belongings with you and return the interpretation receiver. Thank you.
Thank you, interpreters. Thank you, interpreters. Thank you, interpreters. You are welcome. Thank you very much.